Okay, hi everyone. It's good. I was going to say good morning, sort of, almost good afternoon. So used to wearing it now. So good morning, everyone. My name is Cheryl Chung from the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. I'm the Program Director of Executive Education, Singapore Futures, and I've got my colleagues Ani and Hanan here with me today. So thank you very much for joining our little interactive Futures Thinking workshop. In the last, I would say, year and a bit, we've been trying to build up our futures capacity within the LKY school in the Executive Education Department. So that's been something that's very exciting for us, so really appreciate the opportunity to come and share a couple of ideas with you. It sounds like it's been a pretty intense morning, so I hope that you don't mind a bit of a change of pace or a change of kind of energy level. So the session that we will have today, we've called it Foresight-Based Approach to Exploring Multiple Futures and Anticipating Risk. And actually, that's a fancy kind of academic sounding term for a Lego exercise, so it's kind of get it past the sensors, I mean, that's what we're hoping to do today, so you should be at a table with some Lego post-its, markers, that kind of thing. What we're hoping to do is take a little bit more of an exploratory, kind of creative imagination, storytelling approach to thinking about the future and thinking about risk. I think these are very intense, it can be very serious conversations, but just kind of bringing a different energy to the space, and let's see how that feels, okay? I think the other thing I will say before I get into the program and the details of what we'll be doing today is that, one thing about futures thinking is really this idea of opening up the possibility space and starting to question assumptions, right? You can see already from that description where there might be some kind of synergies with the world of risk assessment, risk management, and so on. So I'm going to try to, at least from my perspective as a futurist in public policy for a long time, kind of share a few ideas of where I think there might be some similarities and some interesting kind of crossover ideas. So we have an hour today. This is kind of a brief program. I'll do a bit of workshop setup, and we'll talk a little bit about some trends. And then we will do a developing a vision of the future of geopolitics in Asia 2040, which is the time frame that we'll be using. And then after that, we've got an opportunity to do some sharing and reflections. And for those of us who are joining online, we do have an augmented activity for you as well. Unfortunately, we could not send Lego to everybody, but we hope you'll still be able to participate with us during this workshop. Is that okay? Everybody good to go? Okay, awesome. Okay, so the first thing I would say is there's a little diagram here behind me and on the screens. This is a diagram called the Futures Cone. And if you think of me, Cheryl, in December 2019, standing on this end of the cone, looking out into my future, there was one thing that happened, which was my travel insurance came up for the renewal, and normally I travel about 30-40% of the time, like many of you. So I said, oh, of course I will extend my annual travel insurance, all sectors, all zones, all year. So that was me looking into this projected future, December 2019, extrapolating from past data, 2017, 18, 19, all look the same. Therefore, 2020 must also look the same. And that was my business as usual, what we call projected future baseline scenario, right? And when a lot of us are doing planning, allocating resources, this is the baseline scenario that we tend to follow, yeah? What futures thinking tries to do is tries to help us entertain this question, this very uncomfortable question of what if we were wrong? Right? So what if we were wrong about these planning parameters? And what are some of these uncertainties, about the future that we might need to start to take into account? So as you can see from the diagram, it's this idea that the further ahead you go into the future, the cone of possibility kind of expands, right? And that's what makes the planning, the risk assessment and so on, that's what makes it difficult. So normally when we think about futures, and when our introductory classes, right, everybody will always say, oh, futures is just about time, right? So it's this idea of planning in the 5-year, 10-year, 15-year, 20-year time horizon. But I would like to kind of extend or expand that definition to also think about futures as in plural with an S, right? So this idea of multiple futures, multiple possibilities, and futures thinking as a kind of, I would say, systematic, hopefully, way of questioning assumptions, right? This entertaining this idea of what if we were wrong? Which brings me to maybe my first reflection point, that futures and risk management actually try to prepare for this question of what if we were wrong? You know, and there are many, I would say, challenges around this efficiency goal, right, of allocating resources. But actually the goal of futures and the goal of risk management is a resilience goal rather than an efficiency goal. So there will always be a little bit of this tension. But you know, at least in the futures thinking world, the more, I would say, articulate we can be about what are some of these uncertainties and the many ways that we might be wrong, you know, hopefully that's something that we can add to the conversation. Okay, the second thing I want to say is also the kind of perspective that we'll be taking from I would say, organization perspective. So if you look at this darkest blue bubble right at the bottom where it says actor, you know, that's the decision-making entity, right? Here it's called the learning organization, but basically the decision-making entity has some actions it can take in its strategic operating environment immediately around it. So, you know, this may be related to its core business or employees or, you know, kind of immediate stakeholders. And we call this the direct environment or transactional environment. But where futures tries to focus is this indirect environment, right, which is beyond that immediate kind of strategic operating environment. And this is interesting because just as we think about history, and you know, when we study history, we look at the action, but we also look at the zeitgeist, right? The context in which a particular action was taken. And depending on the context, the effect, the intended and unintended consequences of the action can significantly change. But when we plan strategy, we almost assume that our strategy or our actions take place in a vacuum, right? If I do this, then of course it will come to pass, you know. But experience tells us that that might not be the case. So futures thinking tries to understand what this zeitgeist of the future looks like, right? This contextual environment that, you know, if we are taking strategic action in it, actually how the intended and unintended consequences start to look like. So I think, which brings me to my second reflection point, which is that futures, just like risk, does not exist in a vacuum. You know, and the actions that we take can have these intended and unintended consequences. So try to map that out, right, and kind of explore that, perhaps in a creative and imaginative way, maybe can add some value to the discussion as well. Okay, so the third thing I would say, it's been so long that I've given a talk in person with paper that it's like, I forgot how difficult it is to juggle the mic, the clicker, and the paper, and keeping my talking points together. Okay. So the third thing I want to say is this idea of, you know, looking at the trends, and some of the panels that we were listening to this morning talked about this idea of systemic risk and, you know, the challenges of interconnected risk factors, right? I love this phrase, multi-dimensional coupling. You know, so when we're looking at, let's say, something like the future of geopolitics, you know, there might be a number of risks, you know, trends, issues that we can start to observe. You know, and I just listed some of them from some recent workshops that we've been doing with a partner on the future of geopolitics in Asia. And some of them might be what we call black swans, right? So the high profile, hard to predict rare events, right? But some of them might be what we call gray rhinos, you know? And maybe in a public policy world where we come from, gray rhinos seem much more of a challenge in the sense that these are issues of willful blindness, you know? They are highly likely, high impact risk, which may be an issue of when and not if. You know, so then it's also this idea of how do we do a systematic scan of, you know, the different kinds of issues also that might affect the future, and what does this start to look like, right? So I've categorized the issues here social, technology, economic, environment, political, very common categorization framework. And one challenge is that it looks very nice on a slide, right? As if these things will only happen in this order, in this neat way. And of course, that is not true. So one of the things that Futures tries to hopefully add to the discussion, which brings me to the conversation. Two slides, one more slide. Thank you. Yeah, which brings me to the conversation about what we're going to do today, is that we're going to start to play around with scenario archetypes, right? So think a little bit about the trends on the previous slide, thinking about the future of geopolitics, and then try to tell ourselves stories about the future of geopolitics, which brings some of these issues together, right? So it's just starting to think a little bit about this, kind of how would some of these interactive elements kind of come together in the future? What would it look like? Can we paint some stories about it? So I think the first thing I would say is maybe I introduce the scenario archetype so we can kind of get into the work, and it just so happens that we have nicely 4 groups. So let's do each group take one archetype. So there are, so you can think of these like kind of core stories, right? So there's one story which is a discipline story. So this might be the future of geopolitics, kind of progresses in a way where, there might be some sort of balance between competing forces. There's still some tension, but it gets to this some sort of, kind of constrained equilibrium with very careful management, right? So this feeling that you're only in this equilibrium because you're holding this ship together, in some, in a kind of an effortful sort of way. So there's one sort of like disciplined scenario. You can also imagine a scenario where some sort of very profound event, or something else, kind of changes things in a maybe unforeseeable way, right? So a complete game changer. And the current system is actually discarded, right? There is maybe system collapse of the old way of doing things, and then a transformation, a birth of a new scenario. And it's a completely new set of rules, maybe new players, that kind of thing. So you could also imagine a future of geopolitics scenario looking like a transformation scenario. You could also think of a growth scenario, and this might be the world where we think, okay, that a lot of the assumptions that we have identified, that come to pass, it's kind of business as usual, and then kind of maybe taking speed, maybe that you can think of this as a bit of a heaven scenario or like optimist scenario. Sometimes in our planning enthusiasm, this is our, I would say, our official vision, right? If things went exactly the way that we thought they would in the context that we hoped, in this zeitgeist of the future that we perfectly designed, then this is our growth scenario. And then, of course, there is a potential of a collapse scenario, right, which is basically system failure, right? So what does system failure potentially look like? And what is this kind of, I would say, hell scenario, dystopian scenario? So the first thing that we always say that when we're doing these scenario exercises is that a good scenario may not lead to a good outcome for the actor. So that's often an assumption, right? So in many of the projects that we do, there is a tendency to believe that because, let's say, the future of geopolitics looks very rosy, actually our position in it is equally rosy, which is a myth. Or logical fallacy, maybe. But the reverse is also true, right? That a bad scenario for the future of geopolitics, that is necessarily a bad scenario for the actor, which is also a logical fallacy. So, I think one of the interesting things about the use of scenarios in an exercise like this is hopefully that we're able to kind of draw together this web of kind of interacting elements and then take a look at how some of these things could come together in a creative way. Which brings me to the exercise. So the instructions are very simple. Basically, it is the year 2040. What does the geopolitical landscape look like in Asia? If I can just assign scenario archetypes, if you don't mind, if that group can be discipline, transform, growth, and collapse at the back. No, Fabian, your group collapse. There's no group yet. Yeah. So discipline, transform, growth, and collapse. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, and then for all of us to consider this particular question. So if you've got, let's say, discipline, what does a disciplined geopolitical landscape look like in Asia for the year 2040? What does a transformed geopolitical landscape, blah, blah, blah. If I can give you the workshop instructions, and we can just dive right into it. So if you are joining us here in Singapore in this room, then the instructions will be to build a scenario with Lego. In person, this would be a group activity. So everybody should have a scenario archetype. What I would suggest is that you spend the first 5-10 minutes. There are some post-its on the table with some markers. If you can, as a group, identify, and maybe what you can do is start as an individual exercise. Everybody think of 5 to 6 key trends that may be relevant for your scenario. What does geopolitics look like in Asia in the year 2040? And then we can come back and discuss and then build your scenario around that cluster of trends. I will prompt you along the way so that I'll tell you when to move on in the workshop. But maybe we can start with that. And then the end outcome should be to have a little, I'm going to say model in Lego of your future scenario. And think about it like a museum or exhibition, that if you can give your scenario a little name and like a title and maybe a 2 to 3 line description of your scenario, that would be great. Okay, wonderful. I'm just going to give some quick instructions for people who are joining us online, if that's okay. So next slide. So if you are joining us online, maybe you can try this. So if you have one scenario archetype, you can choose. I leave it up to you. Same thing, first maybe identify 5 or 6 trends, and then think about how they might play out in your scenario. And maybe instead of the Lego, what you can try to do is draw your scenario or give your scenario a name and a short description. Okay? Any questions for now? Okay, if everyone's okay, then maybe we'll do a quick little brainstorm as an individual, 5 to 6 trends that might be relevant for the future of geopolitics in Asia in the year 2040 based on your scenario archetype, and we can start from there. Great, thanks a lot. We're just putting the trends on the screen, just as inspiration, ideas, but please don't feel constrained by them in any way. hey, just to do a time check, we're 10 minutes in, so if you're discussing the trends, maybe start to try to think, kind of coalesce them into a scenario, and start to play around with the Lego as well, and try to. Uh, we've sanitized them for your protection, don't worry. most groups are kind of almost done. Can we take about 1 to 2 minutes to wrap up so we can come back and share? If you haven't already, maybe you can nominate someone to share your scenario, tell us its title, and give us a little bit of description. That would be great. Thirty seconds to put your final finishing touches on your masterpiece. Hey, is everybody ready? Some more ready than others. Don't worry. Imperfection is good. It's also about spinning a good story. Yes, I know. Okay, so if you haven't nominated somebody to share on behalf of your group, please do so. Okay, whenever you're ready, let's come back and share share your scenario. I feel like this group is very like it's very intent on documenting. Okay, fantastic. I hope that was a fun exercise and an interesting one. So let's come back and share the scenarios for the geopolitical landscape in Asia in 2040. If you can hit a couple of points, so the first one is, of course, tell us the scenario archetype that you were assigned, the title of your scenario, a couple of trends that you might have taken into account, and then, of course, a description of the scenario. I'm going to ask you to try to lift up. I'm very cautious about this because I know the structural integrity of some of these might not survive transportation, but do the best you can, lah. But if you can try to show it in a way that the other groups can see, that would be great. Okay, can I ask for a volunteer? One of the groups to volunteer to go first. Oh, are you standing up because you're volunteering? You are now, yay! Thanks so much. That was easy.
Hello. Yeah, so our team project's title is called A Dynamic Discipline. And we represent one of the discipline archetypes. So a brief history, right? So a long time ago in the aviation sector, we have a lot of American planes flying in the sky in the commercial aircraft sector. So one of the biggest names is Boeing, which created commercial aircraft. In Europe, there are many small companies, like we have the British planes, Spanish planes, and German planes. And many of these small companies want to challenge Boeing and create a plane that's better. So many of them have tried, actually, but to no avail. So long and behold, they created Airbus Industries, which is basically a cooperation of many of the European Union companies. And one of the key factors that I have to bring forth here is that instead of trying to outcompete each other, instead of trying to keep growing and maybe even growing aimlessly, they decided to, kind of hold back. Instead of self-growth, they focus more on understanding the landscape of the European Union and also to understand the different comparative advantage of the different countries within the European Union. So from that, they maintained discipline, and through cooperation, they actually created Airbus Industries, which is now creating, I would say, more than half of the commercial aviation market in the world. So there's a high chance that every one of us has taken an Airbus aircraft to somewhere in the world. So I'm taking this concept to Asia. And in my own opinion, Asia could have done it better and faster. So let me introduce to you our product, which is called the Beast from the East. So it's basically an aircraft concept that comes from Asia. So this is with different Asian countries with their own comparative advantage. So we have China with manufacturing. We have Korea with electronics and marketing. We have Taiwan with semiconductors. Singapore with financial and management. And India with technology and manpower. So one of the biggest aspects of Asia is that we are actually very diversified. We have many countries that actually could contribute to this aircraft concept. And our group strongly believes that instead of trying to outcompete each other, if we cooperated, if we held each other's hands, we can achieve this plane to rival Airbus and Boeing in 2040. Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic, thanks so much. The Beast from the East, I think that would be the takeaway of my the catchphrase for this group. And thanks so much for sharing. Oh, there's this great photo up there. Oh, very nice, love it. Okay. Yeah, you might have to strategically maneuver your Lego for the benefit of, I think, about 40 people joining us online. I hope you're enjoying the show and tell, even though you're not physically here with us. I love it. And it's even got an iPad background, which I think is really cool. Wonderful. Okay, thank you so much. Any questions for our disciplined group about the Beast from the East? Beast from the East, everybody? I really loved your backstory, by the way. Okay, fantastic. Let's move on to the next group. Thanks a lot. Give this group a round of applause. Okay, can I get another volunteer? I'm standing between you and lunch. Just saying. Yeah, you guys are good to go? Okay, wonderful. Thanks so much.
Hello. So we're the growth group. That's not our title, that's just our assignment. We were thinking about what the world would look like in 2040 if everything stayed kind of the same. So as you can see in our Lego, one theme that we identified was a lot of division across different lines, so like nation states, and everyone's kind of building their own tower. And so it isn't that people aren't trying to have solutions, but they're kind of quite disjointed from each other, as you can see. And each little Lego piece represents a different country, or maybe a different part of the world. And as you can see, some of these places are doing pretty well, as you can see from the tower in the center, which has wind technology and like a cool door. And there are other places that aren't doing quite as well. And I think this is kind of our vision of what things would look like if trends continued as they are. But it kind of is, there was a divide within our group about whether this is a pessimistic vision of the world or an optimistic one. Since we were given the task of keeping things as they are, it seemed like some within the group felt like we were already at collapse, and others felt we were quite in a good place. And I think this represents kind of the midpoint. You can see that there is some innovation, but there isn't as much perhaps like collaboration to merit some transformation. And there's a lot of things happening in a lot of different directions, with different impacts for everyone. So that kind of is our vision of what things would look like in 2040. But if anyone else in my group wants to chime in, one idea for names, which we didn't have time to agree on, was an abyss with a beacon of hope. It's kind of rough, but hopefully some of we're kind of the in-between status quo, but I think it seems like that leads to just a lot of different approaches.
I think two things came up for me in this particular sharing. I think the first one was the contrast between the cooperation and then the silos. But even just between the two scenarios, you can start to see some distinctions. But I think the other part, which was interesting, was that how you felt, even though the assignment was a growth scenario, actually you feel that this growth is not sustainable. Yeah, so that actually the status quo is going to be like eventual collapse, right? Like, so it's this beacon and the abyss kind of idea, which was interesting to me as well, right? That actually sometimes even questioning our official narratives of what we think are positive scenarios actually may have a lot of underlying risk and failure in them, which I found fascinating. Fantastic. Any questions for this group? Okay, everybody okay? Great, let's move on to the next group. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Maybe this group, if you don't mind.
Okay, hi everyone. So our transition type, we're looking at transformation in terms of as a future scenario. And one of the scenarios that came up for us was looking at changes in demographics, in particular aging populations within Asia. So the title of our project is Aging in Comfort as the driver for our future vision. Yeah. So looking at rapidly aging societies across Asia, a few things that we saw as potential outputs from this aging population. So for one would be obviously potentially a great investment into automation and technology to begin to replace the declining workforces in many of the countries, in particular the ones that are more fully developed, such as China, would make great investments into robotics and other automations and technologies to replace kind of the declining workforces which are there, but also to maintain their competitiveness and to contain their quality of life. We also felt that there would be somewhat of a leadership change, a leadership shift, if you will, towards the comfort of citizens. So more towards the comfort of citizens, quality of life, longevity, which would also then drive into a greening, if you will, of China and other countries which are already developed and are looking to kind of maintain. So it's kind of moving into a quality phase, a little bit of a plateau, not necessarily pushing further on that. We feel that a number of the countries around there, which may not be as economically developed as China, if you think of that as kind of the center of the Asia scenario, would also transition into more of a service-oriented economies, particularly around the healthcare, biomedical, and other areas as well to provide that service. And then, of course, there'll be a number of kind of different aspects on the geopolitical side in the sense of what actually transpires across the globe with this change as well. That maybe it's not as there's actually a more of a softening, if you will, of this ongoing versus kind of a competitive situation between multiple economic blocks, which is there. For our representation, we have a very good geopolitical map developed out of Lagos, which is laid out here. Of course, we show in the center the green China. There's actually a pink. I guess it's a comfort chair bed for the age that, you know, something like, I think we came up with the Wall-E experience of what people are floating around on, yeah. And then, of course, it's attached through other countries. I think this one was Bangladesh, which kind of picks up some of the also the productivity and such for the country. And then for the smaller countries, there's this ladder of economic development and transition into services as their kind of societies themselves also kind of move up the ladder for that. So that's our transition future. Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. That's really, really great. The start of your scenario reminded me of this Chinese sci-fi short story called Tong Tong Summer, which basically talks about a near future where Tong Tong, who is a little girl, her grandfather has basically the family brings in a robot assistant, but it's a mechanical Turk. So it's actually powered by a human in the back end. Yeah, but if anybody's interested, Tong Tong Summer, you can Google it. There's an English translation on the internet. Lovely short story that reminded me of your scenario. Fantastic, thank you so much. Any questions for this group? Yes. We call the power of imagination. Yeah. You know, core learning objective in our session today. Fantastic. Okay, let's go to this last group then. Wonderful, thank you so much.
So our group has the collapse scenario. So we came up with a name. It's called nuclear catastrophe. The idea of our group is we kind of have two drivers. One was climate problems and climate migration that causes people to move. And the second is a problem with conflict between countries. I think our group has a lot of legal work. I hope everything is clear. But the idea is we have a tsunami in blue here. And we have a door that is closed, and people standing in front of the door because they try to enter the other country. But there's also a wall and there's military equipment there. So there's still some stability, and the people looking through the door can see a nice staircase. But actually what's behind there is also chaos. There's a lot of rubble lying behind it. And basically the whole area trade has broken down, and even some places might be doing better than others. But even the places that are keeping their doors closed and are doing better, they still have a lot of chaos and things aren't good there because trade has collapsed and cooperation has also collapsed. So war and climate migration.
Fantastic. I'm too shocked for words. And I love the use of the Lego to just like rubble, yeah. I mean, I think one of the interesting things is also to really see, right? I think even just within the same kind of set of prompts, same trends, actually the scenarios can come out quite different. And actually very quick exercise. I think everybody spent about 25 minutes. What I'm hoping that this exercise showed you is also that it's just exercising a different muscle, Of course, we could have spent a lot more time doing the driving forces research, and starting from that base, we could have spent a little bit more time articulating the scenario if this was a research project, and definitely we do projects like that. But actually within an hour, just to kind of expand the horizon, right, and expand the different interconnections, I think just getting another set of tools into the toolkit can be very useful. Okay, so that's the end of our formal bit of the workshop. I'm going to ask if there are any questions, comments before we round up and let you guys go for lunch. And I'm just going to inch towards the iPad in case there are questions from the online group. If there are any questions, if you're online and you're viewing us, please let us know on the iPad, which I can take some questions up here as well. How was the exercise? Actually, I should have asked that earlier. I've sunk cost of 1 hour already. Depressing. Oops. One thing we always observe, and because we come from a graduate public policy school, people find the Lego a bit scary. But once they get into it, it's a different way of thinking, which kind of quite generative, which we find very interesting as well. Yeah. And I think in a field like futures thinking as well as risk, which can be very abstract, having something tactile, tangible. So like some of the groups, when you were kind of thinking about the scenario, one of the things I suggested was build an artifact, right? Of a symbol of this future. That tends to be quite a useful way of thinking about it as well. Final call for thoughts, comments, reflections, questions. Too hungry, worked too hard in the last hour. Okay, if no thoughts, and I don't see any thoughts and any questions from online as well, I was just want to say thank you very much, everyone, for your wonderful participation. Really delighted that you joined us this morning. Okay, thank you very much. Oh, back to Nathaniel, sorry.